You hand your baby a soft toy. They look at it for approximately 1 second, then it goes directly into their mouth. You hand them a wooden block. Mouth. A plastic ring. Mouth. Your keys. Definitely mouth. You turn away for 30 seconds and come back to find them gumming the corner of the playmat with the focused concentration of someone solving an urgent and important problem. Everyone around you has the same 2 responses. First, they're teething. Second, just make sure they don't swallow anything. So you buy teething rings. You sterilize everything within reach. You spend the next 12 months pulling things away from your baby's face and quietly wondering if this is normal, if this is a phase, if this is just something babies do, for reasons that don't actually matter. But developmental neurologists have spent decades studying exactly what is driving this behavior, and what they found has nothing to do with teeth. It is not about oral fixation. It is not about hunger. What is actually happening inside your baby's brain when they put something in their mouth is one of the most sophisticated forms of investigation occurring anywhere in the known animal kingdom. Your baby is the scientist, and their mouth is the instrument. The real question isn't why they keep doing it. The real question is why the mouth specifically, and what it's telling them that nothing else can. The teething explanation sounds airtight. Gums are sore, pressure feels good, babies mouth things for relief. It is tidy, it is practical, and it is repeated so often that most parents never think to question it. The timeline even seems to line up. Teething begins somewhere between 4 and 7 months, which overlaps almost exactly with when mouthing behavior becomes constant and relentless. Except the timeline doesn't actually line up. It just looks like it does from a distance. Newborns mouth their own fists within hours of birth, before any teething process has started, before a single tooth is anywhere near the surface. The behavior is fully operational before the explanation for it even exists. And on the other end, mouthing doesn't stop when the teeth arrive. It peaks between 4 and 10 months and continues well into the 2nd year, long after a full set of front teeth has come in. The curve of mouthing behavior and the curve of teething discomfort simply do not follow each other. There's another problem. If this were purely about gum pressure, babies would mouth things that provide gum pressure. They would seek out firm, consistent objects and return to them. What they actually do is mouth everything. Soft fabric, smooth plastic, rough wood, crinkled paper, metal, rubber, cycling through completely different textures and materials with what looks less like comfort seeking and more like systematic cataloging. They're not looking for relief. They are looking for something else entirely. Your baby isn't soothing sore gums. Your baby is running experiments. But here's where it gets deeper, because when neuroscientists actually mapped what the baby's brain is doing during mouthing, what they found was not pain relief circuitry activating. It was something far more precise. Research conducted at the University of Chicago's Infant Learning Lab, alongside foundational work published in the journal Nature, has investigated how infants encode object knowledge across different sensory channels, specifically whether information gathered by one sense can be recognized and used by another. The methodology is called the haptic transfer paradigm. Researchers give a baby an object to explore through a single sensory channel, either the hands or the mouth, in conditions where the other senses cannot help. Then, they test whether the baby visually recognizes that same object afterward. What they found stopped the field. Infants as young as approximately 1 month successfully transfer object information from mouth to eye, meaning after mouthing an unfamiliar object without being able to see it, they visually recognize it when it is presented later. The same cross-modal transfer from hand to eye at that same age fails or is significantly weaker. The mouth encodes object properties, shape, texture, compliance, material, in a format the rest of the brain can read and use. The hands, at that developmental stage, do not do this reliably. The foundational version of this experiment was conducted by researcher Andrew Meltzoff and colleagues, who demonstrated that pre-verbal infants could recognize through vision alone what they had only ever experienced through their mouths. That finding, when it was first published, rewrote the framework developmental scientists had been using to understand infant perception. Your baby's mouth isn't a bad habit, it is the most sophisticated sensory instrument they own. Think about what that means structurally. The mouth in the first months of life is not a secondary input channel. It is the primary laboratory instrument, the equivalent of a scientist's most precise measuring device, while the other instruments are still being calibrated. Every time your baby mouths an object, they are running a sensory analysis that their hands, at that moment in development, simply cannot replicate. The mouth is doing the work, the rest of the brain is taking notes. But here's the part that made researchers stop and reconsider the entire architecture. Because it turns out the mouth isn't just more sensitive, it is connected to the brain in a way that gives it disproportionate processing power that no other body region at that age can match. Studies examining the somatosensory cortex, the brain's internal map of the body, which determines how much neural processing power each body part receives, have found that in early infancy, the oral region commands a larger relative share of cortical real estate than it will at any other point in the human lifespan. The lips, tongue, and inner mouth are, neurologically speaking, the center of the infant's sensory world. By some estimates, the oral region accounts for roughly 30% of the infant somatosensory cortex's processing allocation in early infancy. To translate that into something you can feel, if you drew a map of the infant body scaled to how much brain space each part gets, the mouth would not be one region among many. It would be the center of the entire map. In the adult brain, the hands dominate that map. A disproportionate amount of adult somatosensory cortex is devoted to finger and hand processing, which is why adult hands are capable of extraordinary tactile discrimination. But in infants under 6 months, that handoff has not happened yet. The neural infrastructure built for feeding, for latching, sucking, and survival, is still the largest and most powerful sensory processing system in the baby's body. And that infrastructure does not sit idle once feeding is established. It gets repurposed. Your baby isn't being indiscriminate. Your baby is using the most powerful sensory processor in their body. The one evolution built first, the one they trust most. The brain built the mouth circuitry for one reason, kept it online for another, and handed your baby a research instrument they didn't ask for and cannot fully explain. They just use it constantly on everything. Which raises the obvious next question. What happens to a baby's learning when that instrument is taken away? There's an experiment that answers this, and it is striking. Now, I need to tell you about what researchers found when they looked directly at the cost of blocking that channel, because the implications reach further than most parents realize. Studies examining oral restriction in infant object exploration, situations where babies are given novel objects to examine with mouthing gently but consistently prevented, have found measurable differences in how completely those babies encode object properties. Infants allowed to mouth freely show stronger cross-modal recognition afterward. They know the object's shape, texture, and material in a form the whole brain can access. Infants who explored the same objects without oral contact show shallower encoding of those same properties, not a catastrophic difference, not a gap that derails development, but a real measurable one, detectable in the data. This is the part nobody says out loud in parenting circles. Every time you pull something out of your baby's mouth because it looks germy, or because you're busy, or because you've redirected them 6 times already today, you are making a completely reasonable judgment call about safety and hygiene. That is the right call when the object is a choking hazard or genuinely dangerous. But what you are also doing in those moments is closing a sensory channel that your baby was actively using to build their internal model of that object. The hands they will rely on at age 2, the visual tactile integration they will use for the rest of their life. All of it is being organized right now, in part through what the mouth is feeding back to the brain. You are not just a parent in those moments, you are part of the construction project. Every object your baby mouths freely is a data point the brain is encoding. Every interaction where their oral exploration is noticed and allowed, within safe limits, is a session in the sensory laboratory that is building the cognitive architecture they will use for decades. Your baby isn't putting things in their mouth despite having hands. They're putting things in their mouth because the mouth teaches what the hands, right now, cannot. And once you understand that, you stop seeing the behavior as something to merely manage. You start seeing it as something to understand. Which makes the next part matter more. And now I need to say something important because there is a version of this behavior that sits outside the range of normal development, and knowing the difference is worth your attention. Mouthing in the first year has a specific quality to it when it is healthy. It is investigative. Babies mouth new objects, unfamiliar textures, things they haven't encountered before. They mouth something, pull it away, look at it, then mouth it again. There is a back and forth quality, an interchange between the mouth and the eyes that reflects the cross-modal encoding process running underneath. That is what this looks like when it is doing what it is supposed to do. What looks different? Mouthing that persists past 18 to 24 months with the same indiscriminate intensity, applied to the same familiar objects with no apparent encoding purpose. Mouthing that targets non-object materials, paint, dirt, fabric, hair, compulsively and repeatedly in a pattern that clinicians call pica, which is a distinct category with its own clinical profile and warrants its own conversation with a pediatrician. And mouthing that shows no meaningful shift toward hands-first exploration as the primary mode of object investigation by the end of the first year. Pediatric occupational therapists mark 12 to 18 months as the typical window when the hands begin to clearly take over as the primary exploratory instrument. Think of it as a scheduled handoff between two departments. The oral processing unit trains the system, and then the manual processing unit comes online and assumes primary responsibility. By 24 months, mouthing non-food objects should be noticeably reduced in frequency and intensity in most children. If it is not, that is not a conclusion. It is a conversation. One to have with your pediatrician, calmly, with the information you now have about what this behavior is when it is expected to wind down and what it looks like when the timeline stretches. Early identification of sensory processing differences changes what intervention can accomplish, and the window where that intervention has maximum effect does not stay open indefinitely. It doesn't mean something is wrong. Every baby develops on their own timeline, and that timeline is wide. But you've been watching this baby's mouth go to work for months. You know what their mouthing looks like when it is curious and purposeful, and you will know when something about it feels different. Trust that. You are not overreacting. You are reading the only language available to you, which is behavior. And knowing what to look for gives you a map. Before the hands could grip. Before the eyes could focus across a room. Before a single word existed anywhere in the developing brain. The mouth reached out and asked, "What is this? What is the world made of? What are its edges, its weights, its surfaces, its temperatures?" That question, asked with total sincerity by a 4-month-old gumming a wooden block, is the oldest form of empiricism on record. It is a mind, newly arrived in a physical world it did not choose and cannot yet navigate, doing exactly what minds are structured to do from the very beginning, gathering evidence, building models, testing predictions against reality, updating the architecture when something doesn't fit. The fact that it looks undignified does not change what it is. The fact that you've redirected it 40 times this week does not diminish it. Every texture your baby has tasted, every shape that registered on their tongue, every unfamiliar surface that traveled from their hand to their mouth and back to their brain. Each one is encoded, stored, and wired into the sensory infrastructure that will underpin everything they learn to do with their hands, their eyes, and eventually their words. You are not watching a baby make a mess. You are watching the origin of curiosity. The very first question your child ever asked about the world, they asked with their mouth. Long before language, long before pointing, long before they had any other way to reach out and know something, there was this. And the world, piece by piece, answered. I want to know, what is the strangest thing your baby has ever put in their mouth? Not the most alarming. The strangest. The thing that made you stop mid-step and think of everything within reach, of every object in this entire room. That is what you chose. Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know. I suspect the list is going to be extraordinary. And if you want to understand why your baby stares directly at you while they are doing something they know is wrong, not after, not when they've been caught, but during, making full eye contact while the thing is happening. Not because they are testing you, not because they are being defiant, but because of something running deep inside their social development circuitry that most parents completely misread. That is the next video. And once you understand what they are actually doing in that moment, you will never respond to it the same way again.